the kind introduction. It's really nice to see some familiar faces today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining. I'd like to share my screen now. So you can see my presentation. Can everyone see that okay? Yes, okay. It's an honor to be here presenting to you today about the results of the second Global Amphibian Assessment and how that's led to our current understanding of the state of the world's amphibians. Okay, let's start with the heart of it all. The IUCN Red List of Threatened Species is a critical indicator of the health of the world's biodiversity. It informs and catalyzes action for conservation and policy change. And without the Red List, we would have almost no understanding of the global status of species. The 5 Red List criteria right here allow us to select the most suitable of the 8 Red List categories, ranging from extinct to least concern and data deficient, which corresponds to a species extinction risk. So it's these extinction risk assessments that I'm going to talk about today, specifically the Global Amphibian Assessment and what that is telling us about the state of the world's amphibians. The Global Amphibian Assessment, or GAA, as I'll refer to it from here on out, is a cyclical initiative, meaning that it operates in regular cycles. So far, 2 GAAs have been completed, and we have started the 3rd one this year. The goal of the GAA is to assess the global extinction risk of every described amphibian species. The GAA is also a collaborative initiative. It's a massive collaboration that relies on the contributions of over 1,000 herpetologists and conservationists, some of who are here today, from over 100 countries, and all of these folks volunteer their time, data, and energy to further our understanding of the conservation status of the world's amphibians. Here's just a small snapshot of the folks who made the GAA2 possible. During the course of the second Global Amphibian Assessment, we held 31 workshops in person, some virtual workshops during the pandemic, and over 200 online meetings. So to the people here today who were part of the GAA2, I want to say thank you very, very much. And to those of you who have not yet participated in the GAA, please join us for the 3rd Global Amphibian Assessment. The GAA2 was completed in 2022. It evaluated the conservation status of over 8,000 species of amphibians, which represented 94% of all known species at the time. The headline finding of the GAA2 is that 41% of amphibians are globally threatened. This is up from 32% that was estimated in the first Global Amphibian Assessment in 2004, so quite a jump. We also found that salamanders are the most threatened of the 3 amphibian orders, with 2 in 3 species having a threatened status, and that the number of amphibian extinctions could be as high as 222, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Amphibians are the most threatened of the comprehensively assessed vertebrate groups on the Red List, so they're far more threatened than mammals, reptiles, and birds. And we found that extinction risk varies across those 3 amphibian orders. As I mentioned on the previous slide, salamanders are considerably more threatened on average than frogs and caecilians, at 60% threatened. Although it's pretty difficult to know the true status of caecilians, given that such a high proportion of them are data deficient and we just don't have enough information on their extinction risk. We also know that amphibians are disappearing faster than we can study them. With 4 more species listed as extinct in the GAA2, there are now a total of 37 extinct amphibian species. And due to the strict requirements for declaring a species extinct on the red list, these numbers of 37 extinct species are really more a reflection of research effort than a true representation of global extinctions. We have strong evidence that amphibian extinctions are significantly underestimated. And the reason I say this is because the second Global Amphibian Assessment determined that 185 species are possibly extinct. So these species have no known surviving population and are likely to be extinct. So while we know of 37 confirmed extinctions, there could be as many as 222 extinct species if all of those possibly extinct species have actually disappeared. We may discover that some of these species are surviving in small remnant populations, but searching for them could confirm that they are truly gone. Here is a richness map of globally threatened amphibians. All over the world, we see hotspots of threatened species, often found in tropical, montane, humid forests and on tropical islands. There are 9 countries that have more than 100 threatened amphibian species, seen here on this map, with Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico ranking highest for the number of threatened species, which certainly makes them priority countries for amphibian conservation. The GA2 also provides a really clear and compelling picture of the reality that human activities are driving amphibians towards extinction. Of the more than 2,800 threatened amphibian species globally, 93% of those are affected by habitat loss in some way. This habitat loss is primarily driven by agriculture, logging, and infrastructure development. Climate change effects, disease, fire, invasive species, and overexploitation are also dramatically affecting amphibians worldwide. And I just think it goes without saying that species are often impacted by multiple and potentially compounding threats. So, for example, climate change and habitat loss could be affecting a species at the same time or working synergistically. Last year, we published the key findings of the second Global Amphibian Assessment, along with an updated red list index for amphibians in the journal Nature. The red list index is based on the red list categories. It's a measure of overall extinction risk for a group of species. And the trend line, if you look at the graph here, the trend lines are determined by genuine changes in red list category. So as species change category over time, due to genuine reasons, either serious worsening on the ground or improvements because of conservation, for example, those changes are actually influencing the trend lines you see here. If you look at the graph, you'll see 3 data points for amphibians: 1980, 2004, and the new one we generated in 2022. We backcasted the data for 1980 and 2004 using current knowledge. So we regenerated those red list indices, and we also generated the new one. And this updated red list index for amphibians shows that the status of amphibians continues to deteriorate or worsen. So I mentioned that red list index trend is determined by species changing categories. Something interesting we're seeing is a shift in the type of threats that are causing category changes. So if you look at the left graph, you can see that disease, shown in red, was far and away the top reason species moved into higher red list categories between the years of 1980 and 2004. And this was notably happening when species were moving into the highest threat categories at the actual same time of the peak of the chytridiomycosis epidemic. Now compare this to the graph on the right. We are seeing much less red and more purple. And I apologize for people who might be colorblind here. Hopefully you can kind of see the differences in the shades. Purple represents the effects of climate change. So we're starting to see climate change effects emerging as the major cause of category deteriorations or species moving to a higher category of threat. More recently, so between 2004 and 2022. However, this is happening mainly at the lower risk categories, so near threatened and vulnerable, whereas disease is still the main driver of species moving into critically endangered or possibly extinct. And then habitat loss and deterioration has consistently been a major cause of species moving into a higher threat category. And this is happening fairly evenly across all categories and pretty consistently across time. Okay, now for some good news. There is increasing evidence that conservation efforts are working and positively impacting amphibians. Since 1980, the extinction risk of at least 63 amphibian species has decreased, so their category has improved, primarily due to better protection and management of their habitat. These conservation efforts have also been really important in preventing further increases in extinction risk for countless other species. So maybe species have stayed in the same red list category for a long time, but if it weren't for conservation, actually they would have moved into a higher threat category and we would have seen a deterioration. So just keeping species in the same red list category is actually good conservation. Sometimes. Okay, so the dire state of the world's amphibians today tells us that the approach of many conservation efforts, not all of them, but most of them to date have not been effective or sufficient. Amphibians often have small ranges compared to other vertebrates, and they often fall outside of protected areas, leaving them with little or absolutely no protection. Many amphibians have suffered or are suffering devastating impact of infectious disease, and they're really already experiencing the effects of climate breakdown. So this is all to say that amphibians need urgent, dedicated, and massively scaled up conservation action. I haven't explicitly mentioned it yet, but we published a report last year as well called State of the World's Amphibians. Hopefully you have seen it, but if not, I hopefully someone from the ASG Secretariat can drop a link in the chat. I've also put a QR code here. Please read through it. It's chock full of infographics and amazing, beautiful images of many ASG members. So please view that at some point if you haven't already. The first half of the report is really all about the results of the GA2, a lot of what I've shown you here, but that's actually just a small snippet. The second half of this report is where we really outline big picture, high impact conservation solutions that have enormous potential to address threats, recover species, and prevent further extinctions of amphibians. So I want to get into that a little bit here. All of this is based on the GA2 data. The first thing we did was we identified 50 threatened amphibian landscapes for the first time. These landscapes contain clusters of threatened species, and together, these 50 landscapes contain 71% of the world's threatened amphibians. Their entire range is included within these landscapes. So our vision is for there to be holistic programs for all 50 landscapes, thereby saving nearly 3/4 of threatened amphibians. These landscapes present a strategic opportunity to focus efforts of national and international institutions to protect and recover threatened species. And because amphibians often have very small distributions, we promoted the protection of irreplaceable sites, specifically key biodiversity areas, and a subset of these areas known as Alliance for Zero Extinction Sites. KBAs hold globally threatened and/or range-restricted species and occur both within and outside of threatened amphibian landscapes. And many of these sites are completely irreplaceable, meaning that if we lose them, we are losing species. Alliance for Zero Extinction sites are really key opportunities to make an impact for one or more endangered or critically endangered amphibian species by securing their entire distribution. Now, looking at taxonomic patterns, we found that there's, of the 556 amphibian genera, just 65 of them contain over 60% of all threatened amphibians. So by tackling the conservation for these highly threatened genera, we can save large numbers of priority species. One example that you may have heard about of this highly threatened genera approach is the Atelopus Survival Initiative. In 2021, ASI was launched and an action plan was developed. This expanded the reach and impact of individuals and organizations well beyond what they could have achieved alone. So working together, they are leveraging impact, leveraging funding. There's nearly 100 members, probably even more today, from 15 countries, and this membership continues to grow. And in 2022 alone, ASI raised $1.3 million for the conservation of Atelopus across the range countries. So this is just an example of one genus where we can create a network of individuals and really leverage the skills, the funding, the network of people working on these genera to really have a high impact. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug the recent launch of the Fonseca Species Conservation Fund last month. This fund, supported by the Global Environment Facility and led by Rewild, is for early career conservationists from GEF recipient countries working to conserve amphibians and a few other highly threatened groups of species. The fund is currently accepting proposals for the African continent and the Indian Ocean, but requests for proposals will open for Asia Pacific later this year, 2024, and the Americas will open up early 2025, next year. The reason I'm bringing this up specifically is because proposals that are focused on threatened species in threatened amphibian landscapes that I mentioned, as well as highly threatened genera, will receive the highest priority. So if you have a project or have a project proposal in those landscapes or on those genera, and you meet the criteria for applying, I definitely encourage you to do so. So back to the report. We updated the list of lost amphibians. And late last year, we launched a campaign to find all lost amphibians. We are at Rewild partnering with the Amphibian Specialist Group members to identify researchers who can design and go on expeditions to search for these lost species. We have actually more than 400 lost amphibians currently on the list, and that keeps growing, unfortunately. So we'd like to start rediscovering these species, and our aim is to have no overlooked or lost amphibians by 2033. We also are very aware that emergency measures are going to be needed to prevent further amphibian extinctions. Even though habitat loss, we saw that it's the most common threat to amphibians worldwide, amphibians will continue to fall through the cracks if we only use the tool of habitat protection. We're going to have to use other measures as a growing proportion of species are being pushed to the brink by disease and climate change. To effectively tackle these threats, we're going to need to develop large-scale multi-institutional collaborations that bring together the best science and monitoring methods. They're going to need to harness the expertise of local conservationists and conservation organizations, those folks who have the unique perspective and understanding of their species, their habitats, and their culture. And we will need those collaborations to identify practical on-the-ground solutions that can save hundreds of species affected by these massive threats. And of course, we are going to need to monitor the state of the world's amphibians through regular red list assessments. So we are depending on assessments to be updated. So we are using the most recent data to understand the state of the world's amphibians. We also need to constantly improve our knowledge of amphibians through taxonomic research, population monitoring. There's also the recently launched Green Status of Species. This is an optional, brand new part of the red list. The green status brings new metrics to assess how close a species is to being fully recovered. So the red list looks at extinction risk. The green status looks at recovery. The green status provides a framework for understanding past and the potential future importance of conservation action in a species recovery. I am currently looking for people to participate in doing green status assessments. So if you are interested in this, please reach out to me and we will make a plan. If you recall that chart with the red list index, the graph with all the different points and the trend line was going down for amphibians. We have a lot of work to do in order to bend that curve. So in the future, we'd like to see that curve bend and the curve going upwards towards survival or towards recovery. And in order to put amphibians on that path towards recovery, we need to massively scale up conservation action. We propose targeting irreplaceable sites, threatened amphibian landscapes, highly threatened genera, lost species, and developing those large-scale multi-institutional collaborations to address the threats of disease and climate change. But all of this will require a really unified and collaborative approach. Not one organization is going to be able to do it alone. So the Amphibian Specialist Group, Amphibian Survival Alliance, and Amphibian ARC are all committed to amphibian conservation worldwide. They are coordinating a global network of thousands of scientists, conservation organizations, funders, focused on improving conservation status of amphibians. We're coordinating action worldwide to halt amphibian extinctions, recover species, and we invite everyone to join us in these efforts. So now we know the state of the world's amphibians. Please join us in our mission to save them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey, for the insightful presentation.